At my own stepson's wedding, they placed my chair outside the hall, beside the trash bins because, as his wife said, old things belong outside. And while they laughed under the chandeliers I helped pay for, I sat in the cold hallway, listening to them celebrate a love built on the ashes of my dignity. You know, when you've lived as long as I have, you think you've seen every kind of heartbreak there is. You think your skin has grown thick enough to handle whatever cruelty this world might throw at you. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the moment when the child you raised looks right through you like you're a stranger on the street. When I try to stand, the usher whispered, "Ma'am, please stay out here." That was the moment I realized I had become a guest in a life I helped build. My legs felt weak, not from age, but from the weight of understanding that I was no longer welcome in the family I had poured my heart into for 37 years. But as I stared at those wedding doors, listening to the music and laughter echoing from inside, I remembered what my late husband told me on his deathbed: when they make you stand outside, it means your silence is about to speak for you. His voice came back to me so clear, like he was sitting right there beside me on that cold metal chair. And that night, when I left the wedding without saying a word, I left something behind that would turn their joy into fear and their silence into confession. A small wooden box, wrapped in tissue paper, sitting quietly on the gift table while they danced inside. They had no idea what was coming. Before I tell you what truly happened after I walked away, please like this video, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, and comment where you're watching from, because stories like this remind the world that age doesn't make you powerless. It makes you patient. And patience, my dear friends, is the sharpest weapon of all. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when this family was whole and love was real. I met Harold when I was 43 years old. He was a widower with a 7-year-old boy named Michael, and I was a woman who thought her chance at motherhood had passed her by. Harold was gentle in ways that surprised me. He'd make coffee in the morning and leave little notes under my pillow. "Good morning, beautiful soul," they'd say, in his careful handwriting. Michael was shy at first, hiding behind his father's legs when I'd visit. His mother had died when he was just 4, and the boy carried that loss like a stone in his chest. But children, they have this amazing ability to heal when they feel safe. And slowly, day by day, Michael began to trust me. I remember the first time he called me mother. We were making pancakes on a Sunday morning, and he spilled flour all over the kitchen floor. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so afraid he'd get in trouble, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mother." My heart nearly burst right there in that messy kitchen. Harold was watching from the doorway, and I saw tears in his eyes too. For 28 years, we were a family. A real family. I packed Michael's lunches, stayed up with him when he had nightmares, taught him how to tie his shoes and later how to drive. When he scraped his knee, he ran to me. When he got his heart broken by his first girlfriend, he cried on my shoulder. When he graduated high school, he thanked me in his speech for being the mother he needed. Harold used to say, "You didn't just marry me, you married us. And we became whole because of you." We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching Michael play in the yard, and Harold would squeeze my hand. "He's our son," he'd whisper. "Blood doesn't matter. Love does." And I believe that. Oh, how I believe that. Michael went to college on a scholarship, partly because of the tutoring I gave him every night at the kitchen table, partly because of the college fund Harold and I had been building since he was 8 years old. When he came home for holidays, he'd bring me flowers and tell his friends, "This is my mother. She's the strongest woman I know." But things started changing after Harold got sick. It was cancer, the kind that moves fast and takes no prisoners. Harold fought it for 2 years, and I fought right beside him. Michael would visit when he could, but he was starting his career, getting serious with a girl named Sarah. Life was pulling him in different directions, and I understood that. Young people need to build their own lives. But during those long nights in the hospital, when Harold was sleeping fitfully and I was sitting in that uncomfortable chair beside his bed, I started noticing things. Michael's calls became shorter. His visits became less frequent. And when he did come, he seemed distant. Like he was already grieving not just his father's dying, but the end of our family too. Harold saw it before I did. Fathers have a way of reading their children that mothers sometimes miss. One evening, about a month before he passed, Harold took my hand and said, "Promise me something." His voice was so weak, but his grip was strong. "Promise me you won't let them make you small." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought he was talking about the medical bills, or maybe the insurance companies that kept giving us trouble. But Harold was seeing further down the road than I was. "Michael's getting married soon," he said. "And that girl, Sarah, she doesn't understand what we built here. She sees you as competition, not family. When I'm gone, they're going to try to push you out. But you remember, this house, this life, it's yours too. Don't let them make you disappear just because I'm not here to remind them who you are." I told him he was being silly, that Michael loved me, that nothing would change between us. But Harold just smiled that sad, knowing smile and said, "I hope you're right. But if you're not, there's something I want you to have." He pointed to the old wooden jewelry box on his nightstand. "When they make you feel like a stranger in your own home, open that box. Everything you need to remember who you are is in there." Harold died on a Tuesday morning in March. Michael cried at the funeral, held my hand during the service, and promised he'd take care of me. "You're still my mother," he said. "That will never change." But change it did, and faster than I could have imagined. Sarah started coming around more often after the funeral. She was polite, but there was something cold in her politeness. She'd rearrange things in the house when she visited, little things that made it feel less like my home and more like a place she was planning to take over. She'd open Harold's medicine cabinet and make comments about how cluttered it was. She'd look at our family photos and suggest that Michael might want to update the decor now that he was starting fresh. Michael began calling me by my first name instead of mother. At first, I thought it was just grief making him distant. But then I noticed he only did it when Sarah was around. When we were alone, he'd still slip and call me Mom sometimes, but he'd catch himself and correct it like he was embarrassed. The first real crack in our foundation came about 6 months after Harold's death. Michael and Sarah announced their engagement, and I heard about it from Mrs. Henderson next door. She came over with a plate of cookies and said, "Isn't it wonderful about Michael? Sarah's been showing everyone her ring at the grocery store." I sat there holding those cookies, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd helped become, hadn't told me he was getting married. I was finding out from the neighbor like I was just another person in town, not the woman who'd bandaged his cuts and celebrated his victories for nearly 3 decades. When Michael came over that evening, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Congratulations on your engagement," I said. "I wish you'd told me yourself." He had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, I'm sorry. Things have been so crazy with work and planning. Sarah wanted to tell her family first, and then we were going to tell you." But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Sarah had been there when Mrs. Henderson saw the ring. She'd been telling everyone except me. "I'd love to help with the wedding planning," I offered. "I know how to stretch a budget, and I have some ideas." "That's so sweet of you," Sarah interrupted, appearing in the doorway like she'd been listening the whole time. "But we already have everything under control. We don't want to trouble you with all the stress of planning. You should just relax and enjoy being a guest." A guest. In my own son's wedding. The word sat heavy in my chest like a stone. Michael looked uncomfortable, but he didn't correct her. He just squeezed my shoulder and said, "We'll make sure you have a good time, Mom. Don't worry about anything." But I was worrying. Not about the wedding plans, but about the distance I felt growing between us every day. It was like watching someone you love disappear behind a fog, getting dimmer and dimmer until you're not sure they're there at all. The exclusions started small. They'd go look at wedding venues without mentioning it to me, then show me pictures afterward like I was a family friend they were updating. When they went to taste cakes, I heard about it from Michael's coworker who happened to be at the same bakery. When they registered for gifts, I found out by accidentally seeing Sarah's social media post about it. Each time, when I'd mention feeling left out, Sarah would say something like, "Oh, we didn't want to bother you," or "We thought you might be tired." And Michael would nod along, like he agreed that I was some fragile old woman who couldn't handle normal family activities. The worst part wasn't being excluded from the planning. The worst part was watching my son become someone I didn't recognize. He'd always been thoughtful, always considerate of other people's feelings. But around Sarah, he became dismissive of me in ways that cut deep. When I'd offer suggestions about flowers or music, he'd say, "That's not really the vibe we're going for." When I'd share stories about his father's and my wedding, hoping to feel connected to their happiness, Sarah would smile that cold smile and say, "That's nice, but we want this day to be about us, not the past." About us, not the past. Like I was just history to be politely acknowledged and then forgotten. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Sarah's mother, Patricia. She was all smiles and excitement, telling me about the dress she'd bought and how beautiful the venue was going to be. "I can't wait to see the family photos," she said. Sarah showed me where they're planning to take them, by that lovely gazebo in the garden. "It's going to be perfect with just the immediate family." Just the immediate family. I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of oatmeal, realizing that I wasn't considered immediate family anymore. Patricia must have seen something in my face because she got quiet and awkward. "Oh," she said. "I'm sure they'll take some nice pictures with you too. Some nice pictures with me too." Like I was the family friend who gets invited into one polite group photo and then dismissed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Harold, about all the promises we'd made to each other and to Michael. About the family we'd built with so much love and intention. About the boy who used to crawl into bed with us during thunderstorms and now looked at me like I was an inconvenience. I got up and went to Harold's old jewelry box, the one he'd told me to open if I ever felt like a stranger in my own life. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, I found things I'd never seen before. A sealed envelope with my name on it in Harold's handwriting. A copy of the deed to our house, showing both our names as owners. His will, with a note attached explaining that he'd never removed my name from any of the properties or accounts. And underneath everything, our wedding photo, with a note on the back, for my wife, who made this family whole. "Never let them make you forget your worth." I sat there on our old sofa, reading Harold's letter by the light of the lamp he used to read under every evening. The letter was 4 pages long, written in his careful script, and every word was like hearing his voice again. "My dearest wife," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and someone has made you feel like you don't belong in the life we built together. I'm writing this because I know my son and I love him, but I also know that love can make people weak sometimes. He might choose his new family over the one that raised him, not because he stops loving you, but because it feels easier than standing up for what's right." Harold had seen it all coming. He'd known that Sarah would try to erase me from Michael's life, and he'd known that Michael might let her. But he'd also made sure I wouldn't be powerless if that day came. "Everything we built is still ours," the letter continued. "The house, the business, the investments, they're all in both our names because you earned them with every meal you cooked, every night you stayed up with our sick boy, every dream you sacrificed to make our family work. If they try to make you disappear, remind them who helped build what they're trying to take." I cried reading that letter. Not just from sadness, but from relief. Harold had seen my worth even when I was starting to forget it myself. He made sure I wouldn't be left with nothing if the people I'd loved decided I was no longer convenient to love back. The next morning, Michael called to go over some last-minute wedding details. His voice was cheerful, like everything was normal, like I hadn't spent the night grieving the loss of my place in his life. "We're so excited you're coming, Mom," he said. "It's going to be a beautiful day." "Where exactly am I sitting?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "At the ceremony. At the reception." "Where is my seat?" Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah's handling all that." "I'm sure you'll be somewhere nice." "Sarah's handling all that." Not, "We'll make sure you're comfortable," or "You'll be right up front where family belongs." Sarah was handling it, and I was supposed to trust that the woman who'd been systematically erasing me from my son's life would suddenly remember to treat me with dignity on the most important day of theirs. "Michael," I said, "I raised you. I was there when you took your first steps, when you lost your first tooth, when you graduated college. I'm not just some guest at this wedding. I'm your mother." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Harder. I know you've done a lot for me, but this is Sarah's day too, and she wants things a certain way. Can you please just let us have this without making it complicated? Making it complicated. That's what asking to be treated like family had become a complication. I'll see you at the wedding, I said quietly, and hung up. That was the last real conversation my son and I had before the wedding day. The last time he called me mom. The last time I allowed myself to hope that love would be stronger than convenience. The morning of the wedding, I got up early and put on my best dress, a navy blue one that Harold always said brought out my eyes. I did my hair the way I used to for special occasions, with the little pearl pins Harold had given me for our anniversary. I wanted to look like the mother of the groom should look, dignified and proud and happy for her son. I had prepared a gift too. Not something from their registry. Sarah had made it clear that the gifts she wanted were specific and expensive, and I understood I wasn't expected to compete with her well-off relatives. Instead, I had wrapped Harold's jewelry box, the one with his letter and our documents. I thought maybe, when they opened it later, they'd understand what family really meant. What I had meant to their family all these years. I arrived at the church early, carrying my small purse and the wrapped box. The morning was beautiful, the kind of perfect spring day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Cars were pulling up, well-dressed people were greeting each other with hugs and laughter. Everyone looked so happy, so excited to be there. I walked up to the front doors where a young man in a suit was directing guests. He had a clipboard and that slightly frazzled look of someone trying to keep track of too many details. "Good morning," I said with a smile. "I'm Michael's mother." He looked down at his clipboard, flipping through pages. "What's your name, ma'am?" I told him, and watched as he ran his finger down the list, his brow furrowing with concentration. Finally, he looked up with an apologetic smile. "Ma'am, your seat is out here." I thought I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" "Your seat is in the hallway," he said, pointing to a small table set up outside the main sanctuary doors. "Table 7. There's a nice chair and everything." I stared at him, then at the table he was pointing to. It was right next to the janitor's closet, beside 2 large trash bins that the caterers were using for setup. A single folding chair sat at a card table with a handwritten place card that read my name. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the groom's mother." The young man looked uncomfortable now. He glanced back at his clipboard, then toward the church doors where I could hear the organist practicing. "Ma'am, this is what I was told. Mrs. Sarah specifically said, she said you preferred to sit outside." Preferred to sit outside. Like I was some hermit who couldn't handle being around people. Like I was the one who had asked to be excluded from my own son's wedding. I stood there for a moment, holding my gift and my small purse, trying to understand how this had happened. How the boy who used to insist I sit next to him at every school play and graduation ceremony had decided that his wedding day would be better without me in the room. People were walking past me now, dressed in their wedding finery, casting curious glances at the old woman standing frozen by the door. I could hear them whispering, not unkindly but with that particular tone people use when they're witnessing something awkward they don't quite understand. "Ma'am," the usher said gently, "if you could take your seat, the ceremony will be starting soon." I looked at that folding chair one more time, at the card table that would be my view of my son's most important day, and something inside me just broke. Not loudly or dramatically, but quietly, like a thread that's been stretched too thin finally snapping. I walked over to the table and set my gift down among the other wedding presents. Then I turned and walked away from the church, away from the laughter and music and celebration, away from the family that had decided I was no longer part of their story. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too shocked for tears. I just walked to my car and sat there for a moment, listening to the faint sound of the wedding march beginning inside. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the silhouettes of all the people who were considered worthy of witnessing my son's marriage. And I wasn't one of them. That's when I remembered Harold's letter and his words about silence gathering its power. That's when I realized that walking away wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I drove home slowly, past the familiar streets of the town where I'd lived for 37 years, where I'd raised a boy who was now a man who couldn't find room for me at his wedding. But instead of going inside to cry or call a friend or do any of the things a heartbroken mother might do, I drove past my house to downtown, to the office of James Morrison, the lawyer who'd handled Harold's will. James was an old friend, someone who'd known our family for decades. He was working on a Saturday, which didn't surprise me. He'd always been dedicated to his clients. When his secretary told him I was there, he came out to greet me himself. "How was the wedding?" he asked, and then saw my face. "What happened?" I told him everything, sitting in his comfortable leather chair while he listened with the patience of someone who'd heard many sad stories over the years. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "I want to understand my options," I said. Harold left me that letter for a reason. He knew this day might come, and he made sure I wouldn't be powerless when it did. James pulled out Harold's file and went through everything with me. The house, the business Harold had built and I'd helped run, the investments we'd made together, all of it was legally mine as much as it had been his. Michael was set to inherit everything when I died, but until then, it was mine to do with as I chose. "You could change the will," James said carefully. "You could leave everything to charity, or set up a trust with conditions he'd have to meet. It's entirely your decision." I thought about that as I sat in James's office, listening to the traffic outside and trying to imagine a future where my son might remember too late what he'd lost. Did I want revenge? Did I want to punish him for choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity? No, I realized. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted him to understand what we'd built together and what it meant to throw that away for the sake of avoiding an uncomfortable conversation with his new wife. "I want to make some changes," I told James. "Nothing final, not yet. But I want them to understand that actions have consequences." We spent the next 2 hours revising documents and making new arrangements. By the time I left James's office, I had set in motion something that would make Michael and Sarah face the reality of what they'd chosen when they chose to make me invisible. I went home and waited. Michael and Sarah had gone on a 2-week honeymoon to Europe, a trip that had been one more thing I'd learned about secondhand from a coworker who mentioned it in passing. 2 weeks of them enjoying their new life together while I sat in the house that Harold and I had filled with love and memories and the sound of a child growing up. But houses remember everything, even when the people in them forget. During those 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before in all my years of marriage and motherhood. I put myself first. I went through old photo albums and letters, remembering who I'd been before I became someone whose worth was determined by other people's convenience. I called friends I hadn't talked to in months, women who reminded me that I was more than just Michael's mother or Harold's wife. I was a person in my own right, with value that existed whether or not anyone else recognized it. And I waited for James to complete the legal work we'd discussed. The call came on a Thursday morning, 2 days after Michael and Sarah returned from their honeymoon. It was Sarah, her voice high and panicked in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk to you," she said without any greeting or pleasantries. "There's been some kind of mistake with the bank accounts." "What kind of mistake?" I asked, though I knew exactly what kind of mistake it was. "They're saying all the accounts are frozen. That there's some question about authorization and ownership. Michael can't access anything, not the business accounts, not the house payments, nothing. The lawyer says we need to speak with you immediately." I was quiet for a moment, listening to the fear in her voice. The same woman who'd arranged for me to sit outside my son's wedding like a stranger was now desperate to talk to me about money. "I'll be over in an hour," I told her. When I arrived at the house, my house, the one Harold and I had chosen together and filled with 37 years of our lives, Michael and Sarah were waiting in the living room. Michael looked confused and worried, like a child who couldn't understand why his allowance had been stopped. Sarah looked angry and desperate, the way people look when they realize they're not as in control as they thought they were. "Mom," Michael started, and I felt a bitter satisfaction that I was mom again now that they needed something from me. "There's been some kind of mix-up. The bank says you've frozen all the accounts, and the lawyer says you're questioning the inheritance arrangements." I don't understand what's happening. I sat down in Harold's old chair, the one he used to read the evening paper in, and looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 35 years old, handsome and successful, wearing the expensive watch his new wife had bought him for their engagement. But in that moment, he looked exactly like the 7-year-old boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared. There's no mix-up, I said quietly. I've made some changes to our financial arrangements. Sarah's face went white. What kind of changes? The kind that make it clear who actually owns what in this family, I said. Your husband has been living off an inheritance that doesn't exist yet. The house, the business, the investments, they're mine until I die. Harold left them to me, not to Michael. Michael was supposed to inherit them from me, but that was always my choice to make. Michael stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. But Dad always said. We always talked about the business like it would be mine someday. Someday, yes. When I was gone. But I'm not gone, Michael. I'm sitting right here, in the chair where your father used to read to you every night when you had bad dreams. I'm the same woman who packed your lunches and taught you to drive and held your hand when you were scared. The only thing that's changed is that you decided I wasn't worth a seat at your wedding. The room got very quiet. Sarah was looking back and forth between Michael and me like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand the rules of. Michael was staring at his hands, and I could see his face starting to crumble the way it used to when he was little and realized he'd done something wrong. We didn't mean. He started, then stopped. Sarah thought. Sarah thought what? I asked, my voice still calm but with steel underneath it. That I was too old to matter? Too inconvenient to include? That I'd just quietly disappear so she could have the family she wanted without the complications of my presence. Sarah started to say something, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. For 2 weeks, while you were honeymooning in Europe, I've been thinking about what happened at your wedding. About how it felt to sit outside the church I helped pay for, listening to you promise to love and honor your wife, while you couldn't even show basic respect to the woman who raised you. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know they were going to put you outside. I thought you'd be in the back, maybe, but I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, I interrupted. You didn't know because it was easier to let Sarah make the decisions than to stand up for me. You didn't know because somewhere along the way, you forgot that I'm not just some old woman who used to be married to your father. I'm your mother. I'm the person who chose to love you when I didn't have to, who made you the center of my world for 28 years. Sarah finally found her voice. We were trying to make the day special. There were so many people, and seating was complicated, and we thought. You thought I'd be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion you decided to throw my way, I said, looking directly at her. You thought I was so desperate to be part of Michael's life that I'd accept any treatment, no matter how humiliating, just to be allowed in the same building as my son's wedding. She opened her mouth to argue, but I continued. Do you know what I did during your reception? While you were dancing and celebrating and opening gifts, I sat in my car in the church parking lot, reading the letter my husband left me for exactly this situation. The letter where he warned me that someday, someone might try to make me feel like I didn't belong in the life we built together. I reached into my purse and pulled out Harold's letter, still in its envelope, yellowed now with age. He knew, you see. He knew that love without respect is just noise. He knew that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates, it's about how we treat each other when it matters most. Michael was crying now, the kind of quiet tears that come from deep shame. Mom, please. I love you. You know I love you. I know you love me, I said gently. But love isn't enough anymore, Michael. I've spent 37 years loving this family, sacrificing for this family, building this family. And when it came time for you to choose between my comfort and Sarah's preferences, you chose her. Not because you love her more than me, but because standing up for me would have been inconvenient. Sarah was looking more and more desperate. What do you want from us? What will it take to fix this? I looked at her for a long moment, this young woman who'd seen me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to respect. She was beautiful and ambitious and used to getting her way. But she was also scared now, realizing that her careful plans for her new life might crumble because she'd underestimated the old woman she'd tried to discard. I want you to understand something, I said finally. When you marry someone, you don't just marry them. You marry their history, their family, their complicated relationships and old wounds and deep loves. You can't just decide to erase the parts that make you uncomfortable. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece where our family photos used to sit. Sarah had replaced them with pictures of her and Michael, carefully curated images of their perfect relationship that erased 30 years of our family's history. These pictures, I said, touching one of their engagement photos. They're beautiful. You both look so happy, so in love. But they're not the whole story, are they? They don't show the nights I stayed up with Michael when he had pneumonia. They don't show Harold teaching him to fish or me helping him with algebra at this same kitchen table. They don't show the foundation that made Michael the man you fell in love with. I turned back to face them. You wanted to start fresh, to build your new family without the messiness of the old one. But families aren't houses you can tear down and rebuild. They're trees with deep roots and complicated branches, and when you try to cut away the parts you don't like, sometimes the whole thing dies. Michael was sobbing now, the kind of crying that comes from finally understanding something terrible you've done. What can I do? How can I fix this? I sat back down and looked at my son, this man I'd loved since he was 7 years old, who'd just learned that love without respect had consequences. You can start by understanding that I'm not going anywhere, I said. This is my house, built with my money and my labor and my love. This is my family, created with 37 years of my life. You can be part of it or not, but you can't erase me from it. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my face must have warned her to stay quiet. I've transferred ownership of the business to a trust, I continued. You can work there, Michael, but you'll work for me now, not for some inheritance you assumed was already yours. The house will stay in my name until I decide otherwise. And the investments Harold and I made together? They'll go to charity when I die, unless I see some reason to believe that our family values mean something to you again. What reason? Michael asked desperately. What do you need to see? I thought about that for a moment. What did I need to see? An apology? A promise that things would be different? Some grand gesture that proved they understood what they'd done? No. I needed to see change. Real change in how they treated me and understood our family. I need to see respect, I said finally. Not the performance of respect when you need something from me, but real respect for who I am and what I've given to this family. I need to see that you understand I'm not some elderly relative you have to tolerate, but the woman who made your life possible. Sarah was wringing her hands now. We can do that. We want to do that. Can't we just start over? I looked at her, this young woman who'd orchestrated my humiliation so carefully, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not hatred or revenge, but sadness. Sadness for her, that she was so insecure in her new marriage that she'd seen a mother's love as competition. Sadness for Michael, that he'd been so eager to please his new wife that he'd forgotten his old loyalties. And sadness for myself, that I'd had to threaten financial ruin to get basic respect from people I'd loved unconditionally. We can try, I said quietly. But it won't be the same as it was. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal clean. It heals crooked, and you can always see the scars. Over the next several months, Michael and Sarah tried to make amends. They invited me to dinner every Sunday. They included me in their plans and asked my opinion on things that mattered to them. Sarah even apologized, a long, tearful conversation where she admitted that she'd been jealous of my relationship with Michael and afraid that I'd always come first in his heart. I wanted him to choose me, she said. I wanted to know that I was the most important woman in his life. I didn't understand that love doesn't work like that there's room for more than one person to matter. I forgave her because holding on to anger was poisoning my own heart more than it was hurting hers. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending that things are exactly as they were before. The truth is, our family was permanently changed by what happened at that wedding. Not destroyed, but changed. Michael and I were careful with each other now in ways we'd never had to be before. Sarah worked hard to include me, but there was always an effort to it, like she was remembering to do something that didn't come naturally. And I was different too. More guarded, more aware of my own worth, less willing to sacrifice my dignity for the sake of keeping peace. Harold's letter had reminded me that I was a whole person, not just someone's mother or wife, and I wasn't going to forget that lesson again. About a year after the wedding, something happened that brought everything full circle. Michael and Sarah came to Sunday dinner with news. Sarah was pregnant, and they wanted to ask me something important. "We want you to be this baby's grandmother," Michael said. "Not just biologically, but really. We want you to be part of everything, the doctor's appointments, the preparation, the birth. We want our child to know how lucky they are to have you." I felt tears in my eyes, the good kind this time. A grandchild. A chance to love a new little person, to pass on the stories and values that Harold and I had tried to build our family on. "And we want to name the baby after Dad," Michael continued. "Harold if it's a boy, or Harriet if it's a girl. To honor what he built, and what you helped him build." I thought about Harold then, about his letter and his wisdom and his faith that someday, love would win out over convenience. He'd been right to prepare me for the hard times, but he'd also been right to believe that family, real family, could survive almost anything if the people in it were willing to do the work. "I'd be honored," I said. The baby was born on a snowy Tuesday in February, a little girl with Harold's dark hair and Michael's stubborn chin. They named her Harriet, and when the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the simple, uncomplicated joy of being exactly where I belonged. Sarah had a difficult labor, and in those long hours in the hospital waiting room, she held my hand and said, "I'm scared. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how to do this?" I squeezed her hand and thought about all the nights I'd worried about the same thing with Michael. "You love her already," I said. "That's the most important part. The rest, you learn as you go. And you won't be doing it alone." And she wasn't. I was there for the sleepless nights and the first smiles, the teething troubles and the first steps. I was there in the ways I'd wanted to be there for Michael's wedding, not as a guest or an afterthought, but as family. Harriet is 3 years old now, and she calls me Grandmama in a voice that sounds like music. She knows the story of how Grandpa Harold taught her daddy to fish, and she's heard me sing the same lullabies I used to sing to Michael when he was small. When she's scared or hurt, she runs to me with complete trust that I'll make things better. And I do make things better because that's what grandmothers do. We love unconditionally, and we remember everything, and we pass on the stories that make a family more than just a group of people who happen to live in the same house. Michael is different now too. He still works in the family business, but he works with respect for what it took to build it. He asks my opinion on important decisions, and he listens to my answers. When he talks to Harriet about our family, he tells her about all of us, about Harold and me and the love that made him who he is. Last month, on the anniversary of that terrible wedding day, Michael came to see me. He sat in Harold's old chair, the one where we'd had that difficult conversation about frozen bank accounts and broken trust, and he said something I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the wedding, but for forgetting who you are. For letting anyone make you feel like you weren't important. For choosing the easy path instead of the right one." I looked at my son, this man who'd learned some hard lessons about what family really means, and I felt proud of him. Not because he was apologizing, but because he was growing. Because he was becoming the kind of person Harold and I had hoped he'd become, just a little later than we'd planned. "I forgive you," I said. "I forgave you a long time ago. But I'm glad you understand now what forgiveness cost." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll never forget again. I promise." And I believe him. Not because people don't make mistakes, but because some mistakes teach us things we can't learn any other way. Michael learned that love without respect is meaningless. Sarah learned that trying to erase someone's history just creates new wounds. And I learned that my worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition of it. Harold's letter sits in my jewelry box now, next to the pearl pins he gave me and the wedding ring I still wear. I don't need to read it anymore, but I keep it there as a reminder. A reminder that we are all more than the roles other people assign to us. A reminder that silence can be more powerful than shouting. A reminder that sometimes, the people who love us need to learn how to show it properly. The house is full of laughter again, the kind that comes from 3 generations sharing meals and stories, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Sarah brings Harriet over every Tuesday for baking lessons, and I teach my granddaughter the same recipes I taught her father when he was small. Michael stops by every evening after work, not because he feels obligated, but because this is where he wants to be. We're not the same family we were before that wedding day. We're something new, built on harder-won trust and deeper understanding. We're a family that's learned that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day in how we treat each other and what we're willing to sacrifice for each other's dignity. Sometimes I think about that awful day, sitting outside the church beside the trash bins while my son got married inside. It still hurts to remember, but it doesn't define us anymore. It's just part of our story now, the part where we all learned what we were really made of. Harold was right about so many things. Love does require patience. Silence does have its own power. And family, real family, can survive almost anything if we're willing to do the hard work of respecting each other. But most of all, he was right about this. When someone makes you stand outside, it doesn't mean you're powerless. It means your silence is about to speak for you. And sometimes, that's the loudest voice of all. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, and comment, "Respect begins at home." Let's keep sharing stories that remind the world love is still sacred, but only when it's paired with the respect that makes it real. Because in the end, that's what family really is. Not just people who share blood or live in the same house, but people who choose, every single day, to treat each other like we matter. People who understand that love without respect is just noise, and that the most important inheritance we can leave isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that we are worthy of love that honors our dignity. That's the lesson I learned sitting outside my son's wedding, and it's the lesson I hope I'm passing on to little Harriet as she grows up in a family that's learned, sometimes the hard way, what love really looks like when it's done right. Harold always said that the best stories don't end with happily ever after, they end with, and they learned how to love each other better. That's our story now. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and honest and built on the kind of respect that makes love worth having. And that, my friends, is worth more than any seat at any wedding, no matter how beautiful the flowers or how sweet the cake. Because when you know your own worth, you don't need anyone else's permission to take up space in this world. You just need the courage to remember who you are and the patience to wait for the people you love to remember it too.